For the third presidential election in a row, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee. Trump's enduring, fanatical base of support is an enormously significant political trend. In order to understand the state of American politics and culture, we need to make sense of the Trump phenomenon. Welcome to New Ideal Live, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm Sam Weaver, an associate fellow at ARI, and today, as part of a series we're doing on the 2024 elections, I'll be interviewing ARI senior fellow Onkar Ghate about his analysis of the Trump phenomenon. Hi, Onkar.
Hi, Sam.
So to start off, we called this episode Understanding the Trump Phenomenon, and we'll be speaking about this in terms of the Trump phenomenon. And I'd like to just start by asking, what does it mean to talk about Trump and his base of support as a phenomenon? I mean, this isn't how we talk about other political candidates. I mean, we don't really talk about a Biden phenomenon in the same way as about Trump. So why are we doing this in this case?
It was contained in part of your question and in part of the opening of saying that he has a base of support. And I think in the opening, it was a fanatical base of support. And I think that's part of the issue of thinking why this is a phenomenon. It's something new and important in American politics, or you could say American politics post-World War II. And if you can remember back to the 2016 election, when Trump first announced that he was running for president, most commentators took it not as a joke, not that he wouldn't run, but that his candidacy would be a joke. This will be amusing in the months running up to the election to have him spewing off and whatever crosses his mind and so on. But there's no chance for him to win. And then it became, as the election got closer, and so it became no. As the Republican candidates dwindled and they fell by the wayside, but Trump remained, it became more and more, oh no, like maybe he'll be the Republican candidate nominee. And then when he became the nominee, it was, oh, maybe he can actually win. Even though up to the election, there was still skepticism about that. So it was viewed like this, it's impossible that he's going to win the presidency. And then he won the presidency. And what it revealed, I think, is the so-called political experts just were way off base about his chances of winning, but that he tapped in to a real base, and that's an enduring base, a base of support, a base that wants him as the candidate. And so it revealed something about the country, and I think where the country is at. And more broadly, part of the way it will be talked about now, and part of that this is a phenomenon, many commentators, I think rightly, are talking about a rise of, one way they'll put it is a rise of populism throughout the Western world. And it sort of includes the US, but it includes many parts of Europe, for instance, of populist figures gaining more political currency. And that's part of thinking of it like there's a phenomenon going on here. It's not just one individual candidate. And that's part of what it means to think of this, that this is a phenomenon and it's a shift in American politics. And you can think of it like what would be other parallels to this in recent American history. Reagan was thought of in this way, that it's a political shift that's bigger than just him as a candidate. And one has to understand that to understand Reagan's appeal. There's something similar, I think, in regard to Trump here.
So I wanted to ask you also, why do you think it is important for us at ARI to analyze a trend like the Trump phenomenon? And we're a philosophical organization. What kind of analysis are we providing? Are we aiming to provide that's different from what you otherwise might hear?
So let's start off with what we're not doing. And this is important just from ARI's, what ARI is. We're a 503 nonprofit. We don't engage and can't engage, and we don't engage in advocating for or against specific candidates, specific parties. We're not trying to tell people how to vote in the next election. So we're not campaigning. We're not lobbying. That's not what we do at the Institute. We're a philosophical and an educational organization. We have a long-term vision of wanting to change fundamental ideas in the country for the better. I mean, certainly from our perspective, for the better. But as a philosophical organization, and then we have a particular philosophy, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, objectivism, that we advocate, we're interested in politics. I mean, one of the major branches of philosophy is political philosophy, of what proper political organization is, of why you need a government, what kind of government is proper, and what a philosophy offers then. If a philosophy in objectivism's conception of philosophy offers you guidance, it offers you advice about how to live, and that includes advice about political organization, and you can think political social organization. So if you're interested in philosophy, you have to be interested in politics and sort of long-term trends in politics. And more than that, if a philosophy is to give you guidance, part of that guidance is at an individual level, just about how you should live your life, what ideals you should have, what values you should adopt, what virtues you should practice. But more broadly than that, if it's giving real guidance, it's helping you understand the world. It's helping you understand yourself and your place in the world. But it's helping you navigate the whole world, and that includes your political and cultural environment, its trends. And if you look at Ayn Rand's work, she wrote a lot of political and cultural commentary. And I think she thought it important to do that because this is part of the value of her philosophy. It helps you understand world events in a way that if you're just listening to the mainstream or listening to things that are coming from a different philosophical perspective, you won't understand fully what is going on. So I think this is a vital part of what a philosophy offers. I think Ayn Rand thought that. And if what we're doing is trying to advocate for and spread her philosophy, that's part of what we have to be doing at ARI. And it's part of what we have done and will continue to do.
So speaking of what we have done about this topic, back in 2016, shortly after the election that when Trump won, he was elected to the presidency, you wrote an essay for ARI called One Small Step for Dictatorship. This was about the Trump phenomenon and your analysis of it. So I wanted to revisit that essay, and we can talk a little bit also about what has happened in the time since then. But just thinking of that essay right now, what was your basic diagnosis in that essay of the Trump phenomenon? And what were some of the evidence that you pointed to support that?
The essay it was written right after the 2016 election of what I thought the meaning of Trump being elected was, so the focus was not so much on Trump as an individual, as the campaign that he ran and the fact that he won based on that campaign. And putting it as the Trump phenomenon, that I think for anyone really following the 2016 election, he had a base of enthusiastic support. And to understand that and what that means for the country, that it's not, people would often say, I don't like Trump. I'm voting for the lesser of two evils because I really don't like Hillary Clinton, his opponent in the 2016 election. But if you watched some of the Trump's rallies, they did not have the atmosphere of, yeah, of course, this guy's scum, he's evil, but he's the lesser of two evils. It was enthusiastic support for him. And I met many Trump, who would go on to be Trump voters, but so Trump supporters in the run up to the 2016 election who would say that, oh yeah, I don't like Trump, I think he's bad, but Hillary, we can't have Hillary in the office of the presidency. But if you talked to them a bit and argued with them a bit, it took, I would say, it took about 10 minutes until they started telling you things about what was good about Trump and why they like. And I would often point out that, notice, you're now not viewing him as evil. You're saying that, oh, like, there's all kinds of positives about Trump. And that was part of the phenomenon. And many people in the 2016 election and its immediate aftermath tried to downplay that it was, you can't understand it if you don't understand how bad Hillary is. And there certainly was an element of people voting, and a significant element of people voting against Hillary and sort of holding their nose and voting for Trump. But there was a substantial element of people who were enamored with Trump. And if you think of what it was that they were enamored with, I think one of the ways I put it in the article is that what's significant here is not so much Trump, though that is significant, but what I was focused on is what this tells you about the state of the country, that he has a base of support that is enthusiastic and fanatical. And one of the things I put in the article that, I mean, Trump brings up, but other commentators have brought up, is what he said, that he was aware of this level of support through the country. So one of the things he said in the campaign trail was the support he has is incredible. He could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and they would still be on his side and would be still supporting him. And he was aware of that. And I think there's a real element of truth in that it was fanatical support for someone who, if you think of the campaign, it had all the earmarks of how dictators run. And here, to think about dictators, one should not just think about, say, like Nazi Germany or communist Russia, which are much more ideological. If you think of dictators throughout South America, throughout Africa, they're less ideological, but they have a certain kind of playbook. And you could see Trump using that so the extent that he demonized people in the campaign. And part of what I wrote about in the article is, we're used to the political opponents demonizing each other and saying, like, if you vote for Hillary, that is the worst person in the world. That we're used to. But that it was all kinds of segments of the American population, immigrants, free traders, journalists, many figures in Silicon Valley, that Trump was attacking. This was new, new in post-World War II politics, that someone could attack large swaths of the American people, and it wouldn't turn off Americans, or there was like a substantial minority of Americans that didn't turn off. That, like, why are you attacking my fellow American citizens? And I mean, there were many more elements. That's part of what the article is arguing in the campaign, that it's the playbook of what a dictator uses. And instead of that losing him support, it won him significant support. And that is what was, I think, significant about the 2016 election, and the fact that Trump could win. He ran an incredibly negative campaign, that America's a disaster, nobody can do anything except him. Again, that's what a dictator says, that it's, you have to vote for me, nobody else can solve these problems. What Trump would do, nobody knew. He didn't know. He didn't say what he would do in the campaign, or he switched in flagrant ways. It's what he would do. All of this was, if people, and Americans are not, but if people for who are aware of political campaigns in other countries, in other parts of the world, such as Latin America or such as Africa, it's you had seen this before, and that this worked in America told us, and I think unfortunately, but one has to face that fact, told us something has decayed in the American spirit.
So our main focus today is on the phenomenon, but you mentioned some of the things about Trump as a person and how he acts. And I think there's been a lot of attempts by people to make sense of Trump's conduct, that he seems erratic. He's constantly attacking people he perceives as enemies. Do you have a view of what is going on and what kind of person Trump is himself?
Yeah, I wrote another article on this, I think about a year into the presidency, because there was a linking in the media, and a little bit facilitated by Trump saying The Fountainhead is one of his favorite books or something like that. But there was a linking of Trump to Ayn Rand in the media, and some of the people in his administration supposedly had some for Ayn Rand. And there was an attempt to really link them together. And we got a lot of inquiries at the Institute about, well, what do you think about this linking of Ayn Rand and Trump? And indeed, the piece that I wrote was solicited by a media outlet, said, like, would you write something on this? We'd consider publishing it if you did. Now, they declined to publish it because I think it was too negative towards Trump, and they were reluctant to publish it. But they encouraged us to. It was interesting. Like, we won't publish this, but I encourage you to publish it. And I think it was a little bit, the particular editor was more sympathetic to the analysis, but it wouldn't fly with the media organization. So it was, we won't take this, but you should try to publish this. And so it was about, if one looks at how Ayn Rand analyzed politics and what she saw as the trends developing in American politics, that I don't think you could, from the point of view of the philosophy, think that Trump is a representative of the philosophy, is in some way or other embodies some of the Ayn Rand's ideals and the things the philosophy champions. But you could see him as the development of the political trends that Ayn Rand was warning about. And in particular, she wrote in the 70s, so in the last productive decade of her life. She died in the early 80s. She's writing about what she called a rise of an anti-conceptual mentality. You can think of it, and I put it like this in that article, of an anti-intellectual mentality, a mentality that's scornful of the intellect, of abstract principles, of moral ideals. And that whole realm is alien to this kind of mentality. And she saw that, like, we see this more and more in American culture, which is why she was writing about the phenomenon. And she thought of it, I think, as a phenomenon. And the article is about, if you look at her analysis of an anti-conceptual mentality, and you look at Trump as a political figure, he fits it. I mean, it's remarkable how much he fits, how many of the characteristics she says that this kind of mentality exhibits: a disinterest, and not like it lies, a disinterest in the truth. Like, it couldn't care less about the distinction between what's true and what's false. That's for suckers. And it's like, I'm above that. I say whatever I want to say, whatever comes to mind. And it, like, how could you possibly be concerned with, well, is it true or not? Does it get me what I want? And you see that in Trump's functioning, the amorality. So not immorality. And amorality means an unconcern with the distinctions between what's good and what's bad, what's moral, what's immoral, what's noble and what's evil. That of thinking of Trump as a political figure, that is part of the essence of him as a political figure. So it was an article about thinking of this as, and that Ayn Rand warned about a certain mentality on the ascendancy and gaining kind of cultural currency and cultural power. And in the article I linked to, you can see this in the story of Atlas Shrugged, that what the decay in the culture and politics of the America, I mean, it's a fictional America, but of the America depicted in Atlas Shrugged, you see the rise of this kind of figure at the end, of who's completely uninterested in what's true, who's completely uninterested in what's good. So a kind of the unleashing of the arbitrary, when an arbitrary person who engages in arbitrary assertions couldn't care less of, or is it true or not? Is there evidence for it? Can I prove this? He just can't care, and can't care about moral issues. Trump, if you take it like his cozying up to dictators, and that there's nothing significant that if he does that, what he did with the North Korean dictator who we called Rocket Man. Like, it's, oh yeah, we've got a great relationship, and so that's part of the mentality one's dealing with here. And it's like, again, putting it back to the issue of dictatorship, that if one thinks of dictators through Africa, through South America, Latin America, that's a kind of type. And it's new that type can gain kind of not majority, but nevertheless a significant minority appeal and admiration for those kinds of characteristics. and it's very much how Ayn Rand, I think, looked at politics. You have to think of you have to think of it both about the philosophical principles and trends at work, and the kinds of mentalities that encourages, discourages, unleashes, or makes it impossible for someone to go into politics and think they have any chance of winning. So part of thinking of this as a phenomenon again is what Trump has done to the Republican Party. And I think one way of thinking about it is he's driven out the better people, and what remains are the worse people. But to think of that dynamic, you have to think of the mentalities that are being unleashed, and therefore the mentalities who can't find a way to function anymore, feel marginalized, and feel like this isn't a party for me and I don't have any chance in this party, and they leave. And you can think of, say, like a Paul Ryan, who was a Romney's VP candidate in an earlier election in 2000, and I mean in the 21st century. He's a better person like the better element in the Republican Party, and it's that kind of person that was driven out. And there's a reason why that happens, and that whole dynamic happens. And that, again, thinking of it, this is more than just a political figure, and it's a phenomenon. It's part of the phenomenon is the Republican Party is far worse than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And it wasn't good 10 or 15 years ago, but it's worse. And that is the part of the effect that Trump has had.
Since you brought that up, I want to go ahead and ask you about Trump's change of the Republican Party. And in particular, I think it seems like there's this new there's this coalition of people who are ascendant around Trump, and it included some of what were previously considered some somewhat different factions within the party, like the anti-immigration people. It's clear why they side with Trump. But also the religious right has been very pro-Trump and has been very in favor of him. So I'm curious about what you think is behind that kind of confluence of things within the party, and any other kind of trends about what kind of people are rising. I mean, there's all sorts of new figures who seem to be emulating Trump, who are influential in the Republican Party and conservative movement. What do you think about that sort of transformation?
Yeah, so I think it's the worst aspects of the Republican Party, if you think in the 21st century, have been strengthened, and we're just talking about the better aspects. They've been marginalized, or they've left. Many of them have left the party. So anti-immigration is one that you brought up, and you said, well, yes, Trump was in 2016 and continuing to today. It's a major thing of, and I think of it as scapegoating, of trying to tell people, yeah, America's a disaster. It's filled with darkness. There maybe is light at the end of the tunnel, but only if we get rid of certain people. And again, I'm thinking of it as a dictator's playbook. They're a dictator's scapegoats. It manufactures crises and wants it. It appeals. He's appealing to the worst elements of people. It's, yeah, your life sucks and people have problems, but the idea that like the average person in America's life sucks is just not true. But it's trying to really activate that. It's, your life is full of problems. You should be at the point of despair. Nobody can do anything except for me. So elect me. And what a dictator then has is scapegoats who are, I'm going to blame all the problems of the country on these people. They're going to be the target. And one of them is immigrants for Trump. And if only we got rid of these people, somehow everything would be great in the country. And the somehow is important. There's no explanation of how, if we get rid of immigrants, anything will be better in America. And indeed, there's many arguments for why things will be quite a bit worse if you get rid. It's because it's all not true that it's immigrants commit crimes. I mean, the disproportionate amount, so that it's as though crimes would go away if we got rid of immigrants, or that they're not productive, so economically we would be better if we got rid of immigrants. None of it's true. And this is part of what it's appealing to the worst elements in people. But it's trying to stoke their fears, give them a scapegoat, and, oh, yeah, okay, maybe somehow if we just got rid of these people. And immigration was one. But there's the element, so you brought up the religious right. I wrote about this in the 2016 piece, that people were surprised by how much support he had among evangelicals. And not all of them, but significant amount of support. And it's, I mean, if anybody who watches Trump knows he doesn't know anything about religion, he's not a practicing Christian. He's not an evangelical. So people like, what? So why are they supporting him? But if you think of it much more, that part of the appeal of this kind, and particularly this kind of religious fundamentalism, is it's authoritarian. It's, we've got a faith, we're going to follow it. We don't have reasons for it. They put so much stock into Jesus as our leader and savior. That kind of, it's a very authoritarian mentality. And that an authoritarian who's promising them some things has a real appeal, even if it is, oh yeah, like he's not a card-carrying member of our church or something like that. But there's a real appeal. And I basically agree. I mean, in essence, agree with what I wrote in 2016. There's certain things that I sort of treated as obvious that I would have expanded on. And one of the things I said in the 2016 piece was in regard to the religious, you can think of it as the religious right, was, can anybody have any doubt that Trump will nominate Supreme Court justices who are going to try to roll back reproductive rights? And I mean, in particular, it's abortion and Roe v. Wade, which is what happened. And can anyone have any doubt? Well, yes, you could have doubt. So I would have argued for that point more. And part of the argument, it's two elements. One's the populism. He knows that part of his base is after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Trump doesn't care about the issue. And in previous kind of moods, he would say he's pro-choice. And so he doesn't give, as in basically everything, he doesn't give a damn. But he could think of it as that I'm throwing them a bone. This is a way to keep the support. But there's another element to it. And this, unfortunately, I think is also part of the reason for his enduring appeal. And it's part of the populism. Populism often has a nihilistic aspect to it. So if populism means the elites, the leaders, those who have been in charge and in power are corrupt and they're out to get us, what we need is some, and here a kind of political figure or party, but it's usually a political figure who is going to take on the elites in our name. So the populism it's the name of the supposed common or average person. It's not true. It's the common or average person, but it's the supposed common or average person who's being held down, even persecuted by the elites, by the current leaders, by the people in charge. And Trump in the campaign and since is certainly appealing to that. And Roe v. Wade and the evangelicals, this is part of how they've painted the whole political cultural environment, that it's the elites, if it's the elites on the coast trying to impose their values on the rest of the country. We used to be much more religious. They've taken that away. And what we need is a strong man who's going to take them on. And that's part of how they view Trump. But if you ask about the abortion issue in particular, and part of that, I say Trump doesn't care about it in one sense. He doesn't care about the issue of abortion. But he does care about screwing people. And this is like, he tells you this over and over openly. It's, people try to screw me, I try to screw them back. I'm going to hit them 50 times harder. And this is part of how people then think, well, he's a fighter for me. And so, but there's a real, there's a nihilistic element to, you want to screw people for the sake of screwing them. And the Roe v. Wade did that. There's all kinds of losers when you outlaw the right to abortion, of people in desperate states. They might not have money. It's not easy for them to go to another state and so on. They're in dire straits often. And that's the goal. The goal is to put people into that condition. And this is part, so that there could be no doubt that Trump will make good on this kind of promise. It's partly playing to his base, and it's partly, I'm screwing the elites who are on the side of abortion and I'm taking that away from them. And I'm taking this right away from people. And that's an element of the appeal. And it's an element in the religious right and the evangelicals part of why Ayn Rand viewed the issue of abortion as a significant political and cultural issue, as one of the ways she put it is the idea that people have love for an embryo of a few cells after conception is a joke. That's not what's animating them. They want to take something away from people, a kind of control and a kind of right over their own lives and the pursuit of their own happiness. And there's that element that Trump was also playing to, because he has that, there's a nihilistic element of anybody who's motivated by, I want to screw people, I want to get them. And that's part of the bond, unfortunately, with the event. And he's delivered on that, and they see him as delivering, and maybe he'll deliver in other ways in that kind of for what we want. And so it doesn't matter to them. And they will say this, it doesn't matter. Yeah, we don't think of him as he's a saint, but he's going to get us what we want. And part of what they want is there's a nihilism to what they want. It's destruction that they want.
So I want to talk about some of the things that have happened in the last almost 8 years since you wrote the initial analysis of Trump. And one of the things, of course, that's happened is that Trump was president for 4 years. And in the initial essay after the election, you wrote, and you mentioned this again earlier in this episode, that the flavor of Trump's campaign was, quote, hand Donald Trump power and wait to see what he does with it. Well, now we've seen what he did with it for 4 years. He has just as strong and fanatical a base of support, it seems, as he did before he was president. What stands out to you about his time in office, what he did as president, in relation to the broader phenomenon of him and his base?
You could put it in different ways. One overall way that I would put it is his campaign slogan of "Make America Great" and now "Make America Great Again" is playing towards that he cares about America. And I think the essence of when he was in office and what he projected was contempt for America, contempt for its ideals, contempt for its history. He's the first U.S. president, at least, again, think of it as post-World War II, who knows nothing about American history. And really, I think he knows nothing about America's history, its political debates, its ideals, its founding, and the whole aftermath of its founding. He literally knows nothing about it and doesn't care. Like why would I need to know this to be president of the United States? So it's a contempt for its ideals, its history, its institutions, its form of government, and especially with checks and balances, and why they existed. He regularly portrayed and basically said as much of, like, why am I restrained? Why can't I do anything I want? I'm the president. It's like I'm the boss of the company. Why can't I do whatever I want? And really, there's other branches of government, and there's checks and balances on my power. He couldn't do away with them, but he would want to do away with them, and more in terms of thinking of American ideals, can't understand why they exist. And so you can think of that as the whole idea of a rule of law, and what's so distinctive about the American form of government that the founding fathers created. He has contempt for that, and he projected that he has contempt for that. So the idea that he's pro-America, I think, is the biggest fraud. He's not he's anti-American in the essence of his orientation towards political power. I don't think he's he's not ambitious in regard to political power. So there's a way in which he's contemptuous of checks and balances, but he's not so ambitious and skilled at doing away with all of these, undermining it. There's attempts to do it, but I don't think they were particularly effective. They might be more effective with who he surrounds himself with if there were a second administration. But that, I think, in terms of him as president and what he conveyed, that's part of it. And that's how I think of it. One way of thinking of it, in essence. And people say he was strong in regard to foreign policy. I think he was one of the worst in regard to foreign policy. And just this, I think, should be disqualifying from the president. And what I brought up before of his love affair with dictators, and particularly the North Korean dictator, because there's no spin you can put on that, oh, he needs them to be an ally, or he's trying to play them off against somebody else, in the way that you could make excuses for the admiration for Putin as a dictator. And again, like, Putin can do whatever he wants. Why can't I do whatever I want? And Putin's strong. That you could say, well, it's not true, but there can be a kind of rationalization of, well, we have to have Russia on our side, and they're a bulwark against China, for instance. Like, that's one kind of spin you can put on it. There's various things you can say. There's nothing to be said in regard to North Korea. There's nothing we need from them. Indeed, they're just a threat that they're getting. They have nuclear weapons and getting better missiles for which to launch them. Trump did nothing in regard to that. But the projection of that America can, and like an American president can fall in love with a dictator, not you condemn them, but you fall. That in and of itself, I think, should have been the idea that you could run for office again after doing that's not a turnoff. Tells you something like not very savory about the level of support that he has. And there are many other things one could talk about in regard to his time as president. The major episode is COVID. So the major thing that he had to deal with, and that was a complete disaster. That the response to COVID, and again, if that didn't, his attempts to downplay it, and why so the reasons for why he wanted to downplay it was, this will make me look bad. And if you remember, like, one episode was, keep some people on a ship out to sea, don't let them disembark, because then the cases will count. Like, if it's COVID on the ship, so it will count as cases, so the cases will go up in the U.S., and that makes me look bad, and I've said it's going to somehow just disappear and go away. And it was the abysmal lack of leadership, and the various kinds of things, including just kind of sticking your head in the sand and hoping it will go away, was so irrational. And that it's true that I don't think he was a cheerleader for lockdowns. That came from more of the state governors. He wasn't really opposed to lockdowns and helped facilitate them, but he helped make the conditions possible for lockdown, that if it looks like, which it certainly looked like, but it looked like this because it was, that the federal government is out of control in regard to this, has no idea what's going on, will not exert any kind of leadership. It then fell on the state governors too. Well, if the federal government's not going to do anything, the state governments did, and they leaned more towards lockdowns, and particularly in the more democratic governors. So we got lockdowns that I don't think, if you asked people 4 years before, would this be possible for the government to lock us down in our houses, basically shut down the economy, tell people they can't go to work, you can't produce, you can't earn a living, at the scale in which they did? I think if you asked that 5 years before COVID, everybody would say, no, there's no way the government will do this. And yet that happened, and it happened under his watch, and it happened in significant part for things he did and didn't do. So and just take one other example in regard to this. The CDC has plans and had plans for and here it was for a flu epidemic, of what to do. And it has a game plan. It had a whole booklet of, I think it's 20, 25 pages of here's the game plan. And the game plan is not lockdowns. The game plan is various measures, mostly voluntary measures that people should think about implementing if we're going to reduce the severity of a flu epidemic. And the CDC started talking about this in, I think it was in February of when COVID's really starting to hit. It's been in the news and Trump sidelined the person who was talking about it. You never heard from them again, because again, this will make me look bad if there's a epidemic or a pandemic happening on my watch. That makes me look weak, like as though. But this is how a dictator thinks, as though some person could have control over a virus. No, but it's I'm supposed to look strong in control. This makes me look bad, and that's also a major part of why lockdowns became politically feasible and possible. If you're going to sideline the better approach because this will make me look bad, that it's part of what conveyed to the states. The federal government is out of control here. There's no leadership. There's nothing. And so the administration's response to COVID, I think, is disqualified. Like, leave everything else out. If the idea of voting for somebody who this was your response in regard to COVID, to me is that it should be this should have been, we can't have this in office again. And that's to say nothing of January 6th that we could talk about, because I think of that as the capstone of the administrative. You think of coming into power and then it's leaving, and leaving, not wanting to leave and trying to hold on to power. At the time of January 6th, I think almost everyone, including most Republicans, thought this is the end of Trump. This is the end of Trump politically. You can't survive this. And many Republicans turned for a few weeks against Trump. They were willing to say some critical things about his handling of January 6th and what the storming of the Capitol and of the destruction of the number. I think it's over 170. They say that police were injured in that it's a president who just watches this happen and doesn't try to do anything. And if anything, if the stories are, he's watching it on TV and it gives him a thrill to watch what's happening at the Capitol building. That if you told anybody pre-2016, this is going to be the end of someone's presidency, do you think they can get reelected? Everybody, whatever their political leanings, and the Republican, Democrat, would have said, no, it's impossible. And yet, and many of the Republicans who were critical in the days after January 6th are now back completely on Trump's side. And that in any normal political environment, that's a disqualifying episode. Like, you could not recover from that. And if you think of just the Republican Party, they wanted to drive out Bill Clinton for an affair he had in the White House. And not unreasonably, they viewed that like this should be disqualified. This is beneath the office of the president, and you can't be fit to be president if this is the kind of thing you will do. And it was, in many ways, Bill Clinton was the beginning of the real degrading of the office of the presidency, of which I think Trump is a continuation. But it, like, that used to be that it was, this is politically disqualifying, and now you have a president, people storming the Capitol, chanting for that the vice president of the United States be hanged, and Trump can't even get on air to say this is deplorable, people should stop this. Like, he begrudgingly said something hours afterwards, after many pleas from many different people, that you need to do something and you need to step in, because it was reasonable to think you've partly incited this crowd. And in a pre-2016 environment, and so this is part of what it means, like, there's a major political change here, that the episode would have been disqualifying. We would not be talking about a second Trump presidency. The possibility of a second Trump presidency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, January 6th has been an issue that people are talking about in terms of the upcoming election, and like, will this happen again? And there's also discussion about the strength of American institutions and their ability to resist unlawful attempts to seize or hold on to power, things like January 6th and a lot of other things. What is your assessment of that, as terms of how strong are the American institutions? Where do you think those stand today? And what's the real risk in terms of, could this happen again? Could a worse one happen? Like, is that something we should be worried about?
I think Trump is part of this trend of growing political violence. He's not the source of it. But he's exacerbated it. So that we're still not at the level of, I think, the political violence that existed in the 60s and the 70s. And I mean, I was born in the 70s. I have a little bit of awareness, like firsthand, of remembering the atmosphere of the late 70s and the amount of violence and particularly if one thinks of political violence more broadly than just the US, the amount of terrorism, hijacking of planes, terrorism at the Olympics. So there was a lot of political violence. But if you think just in the US, I mean, President Kennedy was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Malcolm X, Bobby Kennedy. I mean, we're not at the level of even thinking about, like, is a political candidate going to be assassinated? Though you can again, like, wonder about that, but it's not happening, and happening more than once, as it was in the 60s and then the 70s. There was a lot of political violence as well. But there's more than there has been. And so I say he's not the cause of this. If one thinks of what happened with the BLM protest, these were protests that have a political, I mean, there are cultural political slant to them. They were violent, and much more violent than is typically discussed in the media, or at least what would be called the mainstream media. It will be typically reported as, well, they were mostly peaceful. Yeah, but what's the part that wasn't peaceful? And what was what happened in some of these places? What happened in Seattle? And what's the meaning of that? Of blocks taken over, police stations taken over. This was real political violence. This is not Trump or Trump's supporters. And it happened during COVID, when you're not supposed to have these mass gatherings. You're supposed to be in lockdown. So people looked the other way because it was supposedly for a good cause. This was like that. We got wide scale political force and violence being used. Was it like January 6th wasn't the first in sort of in recent history and in the Trump presidency, but it's a continuation of that. And you can see, like, this is part of how things ratchet up. If BLM protesters are allowed to do this, and they're allowed to do it when they're supposed to be in lockdown, and we're not supposed to have mass gatherings, and when they take over whole city blocks, and so people, it's not really reported. That the reporting on this from the so-called mainstream media was poor, if like that, and that's a compliment to just call it poor. Then it's like, when we've got gripes and grievances, why can't we do the same thing? Why can't we have mass gatherings, protest, and then if the protest by itself doesn't get its way, why can't we turn to violence? And it's not a justification, like, it doesn't excuse them, but it does help explain the atmosphere that we're in and the way that it can ratchet up. So I do think, I don't think of it particularly as, will something like another January 6th happen, but do I think more broadly, is some form of political violence, is it easier for it to happen now than 10 years ago or 15 years ago? I think the answer, unfortunately, is yes. But it's because political violence as such has been more normalized, and it's been normalized on both sides. And this is part of that, we live in an incredibly tribal atmosphere. And Ayn Rand would often talk about it as, it's what we're descending into gang warfare. And I actually think that's better than thinking of it as tribal, that it's gang warfare. And it's they will decry the so-called right will say, look at the BLM protests and look at the violence in them. And they're right to say that there was a lot of violence in regard to this, but they can't apply it to and won't apply it to their own gang, because it's our gang, and whatever our gang does is right. So they can't. So there's no real opposite. So the point is, there's no real opposition to the political violence. If you can't call it out on your own side, then you're not actually against political violence. You're just hoping we're the ones who are going to succeed and the other ones are going to fail. And so we're going to attack them and criticize them. And it's the same in the other direction. So the Democrats will call January 6th an insurrection. This is political terrorism, but they won't criticize the BLM protests, and they won't face what it actually was. And it's, again, so it's proper to use violence if it's for a good cause, and we just have a different view of what the good cause is. And so both sides now are on the side of helping increase political violence, and using force to try to achieve political ends and political goals. And so this, again, that we're in a different political environment than we were 15 or 20 years ago, is like, that's part of what I think of why I think that, and part of the evidence for that. It's the legitimization of the use of violence for political ends.
There are a couple of super chat questions we received that have to do with the Democrats and what's going on that side of the political aisle, and I'll read them both, and you can respond to them in whatever order you choose. So we got one from Mike, who asks, would you agree that the Democratic Party plays an important part in enabling the Trump phenomena? That's the first one. And then Alec asked, I think he asked about whether you see Obama as a similar figure. He mentions Cuffy Meigs, who's a character from Atlas Shrugged, that you compare with Trump in the essay from 2017. He asks whether Obama is also a Cuffy Meigs type figure, and whether you see one as worse than the other one. I don't know if you want to answer that. And I would also add to that it seems like Bernie Sanders is another figure on the political left who has had a Trump-like effect in some ways. And I'm curious if you see it that way as well.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about, let's take the second part of, and well, the first part of the question and the second part of what you asked, so about Bernie Sanders in particular, but the first part was about the Democrats enabling the Trump phenomenon. And just as so the my basic answer to that is yes, you have to see it as there's more than one faction here or more than one gang. And just what we were talking about, the BLM and the January 6th, that there's a ratcheting up. If the BLM protests are allowed and the way that they were, the ways in which they were allowed, and downplaying the violence and downplaying that, oh yeah, you're not supposed to have mass gatherings, but we'll make an exception for this case because it seems a really important cause, and so on, of that there's no principles or rules, there's no rule of law, that people see that and it for sure has an effect, and it's part of how you can get to something like January 6th, that if their side can do it, why can't our side? And not just why can't our side, it pushes people towards, we have to do this. Like, we're going to lose if we don't do this. If you allow BLM, and if you see the way in which those protests, the ways in which they were successful, including all kinds of elements of corporate America, in effect bowing down to them. And now there's some attempts to retreat from, because the whole push for DEI became much more significant after the BLM protest, that we really need this and so on. And now, and partly as a result of October 7th, some of the meaning of that is coming out, and people, including some corporations and some people in the business world and some funders, are trying to retreat and backtrack. But if you see the success of something like the BLM protest, then it's not just why can't we do this, but it's we have to do it or else we're going to lose. And so that's part of the ratcheting up. So yes, for sure, you have to think about the ways in which one side is reacting to the other side. And I would say more broadly, the 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 Democratic Party, and many people have commented about this, have been in recent decades much easier to place on the side of the elites, of those in power, of those in control. And if you're going to get this populist element and this kind of populist political appeal, that's the problem, they're responsible for all our ills, we need to get rid of them. There's a way in which, yes, so the Trump phenomenon is playing on that, and it's playing on elements that are completely corrupt. So, and we talked about some, including the whole that scapegoating immigrants as one major element of this. That is completely corrupt. But from if you zoom out on the populist phenomenon, there is a reason people would think of that the elites are screwing everything up. They don't know what they're doing, but they just want more power. They'll never relinquish power. They'll never relinquish control, even though they don't know what they're doing. And that we need to confront and even smash the elites. You can have some sympathy with that as kind of an emotional expression, but emotions are not guidance. These kinds of negative emotions are not constructive in the sense they don't help you achieve anything. And it's destructive to just smash things if you have no plan and no program for what will replace it. And some people will compare, oh, like we need to be revolutionaries like the founding fathers. It's true the founding fathers rebelled against Britain and said we need to do away with it. We need to abolish the ties. We need to step out on our own. but they had a whole program for what that meant and what form of government they're going to put in its place. And we're not just going to smash and then who knows what's going to replace it. And so, but we just wanted to smash the elites. We just wanted to smash Britain. That's not what was driving them. What was driving them was a positive vision. And as a result, they came to view it as, we can't any longer deal with England and we have to sever ties. In regard that you can understand some of the sentiment that drives populism. If you think of just think of the 21st century, I would think there's three major episodes that one has to think about a lot. I think the episodes that kind of at a political level have formed the environment of 21st century politics. And what the elites projected is complete incompetence. And I mean, incompetence is an understatement. And that's the 9/11 and what to do in response to 9/11, the financial crisis, and then COVID. All of these required real leadership. They required real thinking. And this is what was promised. So after 9/11, it's, we're going to reverse our foreign policy. We're going to set out on being something different. We have to rethink. Bush's was, what we need is a forward strategy of freedom. It was a complete disaster. And sort of the capstone on that is Biden's abysmal withdrawal from Afghanistan as the sort of the end of America's response to 9/11. And it was a retreat. It was Afghanistan, a retreat in like a Vietnam type retreat, and the collapse of Afghanistan back into the Taliban's hands. So the elites don't know what they're doing in regard to foreign policy, and don't know what they're doing. Like, it's completely screwed it up. The financial crisis, if you can remember to that, it was palpable. The panic of the leadership. We have no idea what we're doing. We did not expect this financial crisis. We don't know how it happened. It was complete chaos. And then COVID has that aspect to it. So that one could think the elites don't know what they're doing. And they're wrecking everything. Like, I have some sympathy with that perspective, but it's not a solution to smash everything. But going back now to the Democrats, there's a way in which it's to hold it as, it's not true, but that it's only the Democrats who are in leadership positions and so on. But that they're a major element of this is that has helped fuel the Trump phenomenon, so that people can think of it both sort of the Democrats and establishment Republicans, or they're all part of the elites, and we need to get rid of all of this. And that's what Trump's promising to do. He's going to fight the Democrats, and he's driving out the establishment Republicans. That's what we need. And somehow then some things will be good. Well, you can't have a somehow like that. Like, how will that, even if they're a problem, what's the solution? And it's not a solution just to drive them out and have nothing, or have a dictator, which is sort of what Trump projects. So yes, there is a dynamic there, but people often bring up the dynamic to say that it excuses. That is, look how bad the Democrats are. That excuses what we do. It doesn't excuse. It can help explain what drives it, but both are in the wrong. It's not like, oh, okay, they're wrong, so whatever we do is right. That is not true. And it's too much how people think. And that we're descending into tribalism and gang warfare. It's too much like, if I can just point out the flaws on the other side, that absolves me of any kind of moral evaluation of what I'm doing and what my own side is doing. And it doesn't. So yes, there is that interplay, but it doesn't justify what is happening with, if you want to put it as a kind of MAGA element of the Republicans. Oh,
Right.
the Bernie. Oh, so something about the Bernie Sanders, because that's so it's, and in terms of, I said a little bit of this in the 2016 essay. I would have spent more time on it as the similarity between Trump and Sanders, and that they both had enthusiastic support. They were the only two candidates, I think, in the 2016 election who had enthusiastic support. Hillary maybe a little bit from some Democrats, but not a lot, and not at the level of Bernie Sanders, who was uh, uh, vying for wanting to be president as well. He's a populist in and that his appeal is like, I'm not part of the establishment, I'm not part of the elites, I speak for the little person, the common person, that's whose side I'm on, and I will help you fight the elites. That's part of his appeal. And it is so that we're seeing the rise of populism in the 2016 election. You were seeing it on both sides. And populism is not a phenomenon that's restricted to the so-called right or the so-called left. And that is also, thinking of it as a phenomenon, you were seeing it in the whole country on regardless of Democrat, Republican. And that's part of what was significant, I think, about the 2016 election.
We're almost out of time. Did you want to comment on any other issues that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
No, I think we've hit at least many of the major elements that are important to talk about. I would, I don't know if you would have this as a last question, but it's something I said in the 2016 piece, and I still think this, which is that what has engulfed, or what is engulfing the country, is not yet infected the majority of the people. So Trump's base is significant, but it's a minority. It's a significant minority base, but it's significant. And Bernie Sanders' appeal, who we were just talking about, it's significant, but it's not the majority of Americans. It's a significant minority base that has, I think, succumbed to this kind of authoritarian, dictatorial, gang-based politics. But it's not like that most Americans are like this. And just as in the 2016 election, this kind of sentiment was reported, and I think it was real, that people couldn't believe that this is their choice for president. Hillary, like, I've got to vote. If I'm going to vote for president, it's Hillary or Trump. Because one of them are going to be our next president. I don't want either of these. And I think there's something similar in regard to now Biden and Trump, as that's what it has come down to. It's really, this is what our candidates are. And I think most Americans, if there was a better third candidate, not some fringe crazy thing like the libertarians, who are worse than, if anything, they're worse than these parties. But if you had, just take on the, take it as a substitute for Trump. If there were a Reagan-like figure and I'm not a huge fan of Reagan, but in the Republican Party, I think more people would vote for him than would vote for Trump. So that is among Americans, not among Trump's base, but among Americans. So that still speaks well of the country, that it is we're not enthusiastic, like most people are not enthusiastic for either candidate. But on the other hand, it should be something that one really thinks about. How is it that these are our candidates? It's Hillary Trump, Biden Trump rematch. If it's really true that the people don't want these as candidates, why is it that we can't get anything better? And it speaks part of to the dismal state of American politics and the emptying of American politics. Of first, it was emptied of any real ideals and political principles, and now it's emptied of even policy proposals. And that is of thinking of where we are politically. I think that's important. I talked about someone like a Paul Ryan being driven out of the Republican Party. Paul Ryan doesn't have any political principles. He's not a Thomas Jefferson. He's not a Madison or anything close. But he had at least some policies. It's like government spending is out of control. Our entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, are out of control. We have to reform them. If we don't do something now, it just becomes harder and worse if we keep kicking the can down the road. And he had some real policy proposals. Our politics, and particularly at the presidential level, is completely devoid of that. And this is part of that. It feels like we've got two tribes or two gangs. It's vote for me, I'm better than the other guy, I'm better than the other gang. What are your even policies? Like, can you name any of their policies? I think one can't, and one can't because they don't have any. They might be some hand waving towards something, but they basically have nothing. And that also is. I used to think American politics was low because when you read about the founding of America and the level of political debate of the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, like, we've got nothing like that today. But in comparison to something like the debates around Reagan and the economic policies and taxation and spending, so there's nothing of that today. I named the three, I think, major episodes in the 21st century: 9/11, the financial crisis, COVID. If you ask, forget principles, what are their policies in regard to these of the two candidates and of the two parties now? They have nothing. There's nothing to say, and so there's a reason that American politics is at the abysmal level it's at. And anybody who loves America should think deeply about what does it mean actually to have a positive political program, and what were the original political ideals of America, and to really try to understand them, because there's no understanding of that today. And indeed, there's a disregard and a contempt for it. But if we're ever to get something positive, you have to do the thinking necessary to get to a positive. Destroying things is not a solution to anything. It will just drive us further down the road to looking like any other country.
All right. On that note, I think we should mention some resources that people would find valuable if they want to read more of our commentary on these issues. So the first two are these two essays that we talked about some in the podcast. These were both written by Onkar. The first is One Small Step for Dictatorship. And the second one is Why Ayn Rand Would Have Despised a President Trump. These are both in our journal, New Ideal. And you can see the links on the screen. The first one is bit.ly/small dictator, and the second bit.ly/Rand Despise Trump. Two other resources that we didn't talk about as much in the episode, but that you may be interested in looking into, are New Ideal episodes that we did. One on the storming of the Capitol This was an episode of our podcast that Onkar you did with Ilan Cherno in the days or weeks after the January 6th attack. And we did an episode a little while ago on the 2024 elections. That was also Onkar and Ilan. And that episode sort of laid out the agenda of issues that we think are important to discuss in regard to the 2024 elections. And can also expect to see more podcasts from us on some of the issues that were mentioned in that episode. I want to, at this point, also say thank you to those who were watching and those especially who gave super chat donations. We appreciate your support. And I'll add that if you enjoyed this podcast, we appreciate it if you subscribe to our channel, click the bell to receive notifications when we go live or when we post new content. Like, comment on, and share the episode if you thought it was valuable. That will help us attract new viewers. That goes whether you're on YouTube or whether you are watching the episode today on Facebook. Finally, if you have any questions or comments about today's episode, or you have ideas for future episodes, you can reach out to us by email at newideal@aynrand.org. We read all of your emails and we reply to many of them, so don't hesitate to reach out. All right, that's all I have for today. Thank you, Onkar, for talking with me about this topic. And yeah, have a great day.